They told you Napoleon was a genius, a conqueror, a man who bent empires to his will. But no one told you he was broken. Not by war, not by defeat, by love. Power often wears the armor of silence, but beneath it, some of the most powerful men in history have collapsed, not from bullets, but from heartbreak. Napoleon Bonaparte wasn't just a ruler of men, he was a prisoner of his emotions. While millions feared his name, one woman, Josephine, ruled his soul. This is not a love story. This is a case study, a psychological autopsy of what happens when a great man gives his heart to someone who never truly believed in him. When Napoleon wrote to Josephine, his words weren't strategic or commanding. They were desperate. He begged, he pleaded, he collapsed emotionally in letters that should have never left the hands of an emperor. "You don't write me. You don't love me anymore. I'm shattered." Where was the man who crushed coalitions and rewrote maps? He vanished the moment he needed emotional approval from someone who only loved him in fragments. This is a truth no one wants to admit. The greater the man, the deeper his hunger for understanding. But not every woman can, or wants to, feed that hunger. Because greatness, in its raw form, is intimidating, overwhelming, and more often than not, rejected. The modern man looks at Napoleon and thinks, "I wouldn't let that happen to me." But scroll through your phone, look at your messages, your late-night regrets. Look at how many times you watered yourself down, just to be accepted. Look at how often you've begged silently, behind your own screens. History repeats itself. Only the uniforms change. What Napoleon suffered wasn't unique, it was just magnified. His mistake wasn't love, it was surrender. Not on the battlefield, but in his soul. He gave the one thing a man should never give freely: emotional power. We're taught that power makes us lovable, that if we build, conquer, rise, we'll finally be worthy. But what if that very power is what drives others away? That's the tragedy no one warned us about. And that's where this journey begins. Because this isn't about Napoleon, it's about you. It's about every man who has ever been told, be strong, but not too strong. Be kind, but don't expect anything back. Be a man, but don't dare show that you need love. So here's the truth. The world fears greatness in men. Because greatness doesn't bend. It doesn't apologize. It doesn't shrink to fit the comfort of others. And in a world addicted to comfort, greatness is often left alone. Napoleon Bonaparte was not afraid of kings. He wasn't afraid of armies, revolutions, or empires. But he was afraid of something else, something far smaller, far more dangerous. Rejection. He met Josephine de Beauharnais in 1795. A widow, charming, older than him, unimpressed by his ambition. She was not dazzled by power because she understood it, and that made her irresistible to a man who, for all his victories, craved submission in private. At first, she was distant, cool, calculated. He, on the other hand, fell hard. Napoleon, the man who defeated coalitions, lost all control over his own emotions. He wrote to her constantly, letters filled with obsession, longing, desperation. "You to me are everything. You're not writing. I suffer. I am consumed. I am burning." This wasn't romantic. It was psychological collapse. He needed her validation like an addict needs a fix. And Josephine? She gave just enough to keep him hungry. That's the dynamic no one wants to talk about. A powerful man, emotionally enslaved. A woman who knew her absence could wound more than any presence. And it worked. She cheated, repeatedly. While Napoleon led armies across continents, Josephine entertained others. He heard the rumors, saw the signs, felt the silence. But he still wrote, still begged, still believed. "You will return. You will love me again. You must." That's the tragedy. Not that he loved her, but that he saw her rejection as a test he had to pass. And when she finally did say, "I love you" back, he didn't feel victory. He felt fear, because deep down, he knew. She only said it when he no longer believed it. Napoleon rose through violence, but he fell through longing. This man who once controlled the fate of Europe could not control the cold space between him and the woman he adored. That's a lesson every modern man should tattoo on his heart. Your strength will not protect you from emotional vulnerability if you surrender your self-respect. You can win the world and still lose yourself to the wrong woman. And if Napoleon, the emperor, wasn't immune, neither are you. Power isn't always attractive. In fact, raw masculine power, when it's unapologetic, untamed, and unfiltered, isn't just unattractive to many women, it's terrifying. Let's be honest, society teaches women to say they want a strong man. But that strength must come with disclaimers. He must be soft, sensitive, sweet, compliant. He must lead, but not dominate. He must protect, but never demand. He must shine, but only if his light doesn't outshine her shadow. That is not real power. That's a domesticated version of it. Acceptable masculinity, safe masculinity. But men like Napoleon, they didn't dilute their nature. They radiated ambition without apology. They didn't beg to be understood. They demanded to be followed. They didn't play small. And that's exactly why they were feared, even by the women they loved. Let's get brutally clear about one thing. Not every woman wants to submit to a great man, because that would require her to confront her own smallness. And for many, that's unbearable. So instead, they sabotage the connection. They tell him he's too much. They withdraw, punish, provoke, or disappear, hoping to control him by emotional starvation. It's not that they don't see his greatness. They do. That's why they run. Because true masculine power awakens something uncomfortable, the fear of irrelevance. And here's the cruel paradox. The stronger you become, the lonelier you may feel. Why? Because power doesn't come with a parade. It comes with silence, with resistance, with rejection from those who once smiled at your smaller self. Napoleon felt that rejection, and instead of standing firm, he chased the very thing that feared him. He shrank for her love. And in shrinking, he killed the very part of himself she was once drawn to. If this part of the story is hitting somewhere deep in you, if you've ever felt like you had to downplay your strength just to keep someone near, if you've been told to relax, soften, or slow down, don't. You weren't made to shrink. You were made to build, to stand, to become undeniable. Subscribe if you're ready to remember who you were before the world asked you to forget. Drop a comment below. What part of your strength have you been hiding to feel loved? We read every word. You'd think power protects you. That being a conqueror, a builder, a man of vision makes you immune to heartbreak. But reality is darker. Sometimes, the stronger the man becomes in the world, the weaker he becomes in love. Why? Because he's starved for something he can't demand, dominate, or build: unconditional acceptance. Napoleon had command over nations, armies, and laws. But he couldn't control Josephine's indifference, and that drove him mad. Not because he was emotionally weak, but because he was emotionally starved. Let's get psychological. Every man builds his castle on two pillars. 1. Achievement. I earn my worth. 2. Recognition. Someone sees my worth. Napoleon had the first in abundance, but the second? He never truly received it from Josephine. That gap between what he built and how she responded is where the poison of dependency started to form. It's the same for many modern men. You build, you grow, you grind, you improve every inch of your life. And yet, the one person you crave recognition from withdraws. Not because you're failing, but because your growth intimidates them. And like Napoleon, you find yourself chasing someone who is actively withholding the emotional nourishment you need. This is where it turns dark. The mind creates a false equation. If I can finally earn her full love, I'll be whole. And that belief is fatal because it transfers your sense of identity to someone else. You no longer exist on your own terms. You exist based on her validation, or the lack of it. You start writing messages that you never would have imagined. You beg in silence. You think success will make her love you. You think sacrifice will bring her back. And each time she withdraws, your desire deepens. Not because you love her more, but because you love the version of yourself that she never fully accepted. It's psychological self-destruction disguised as devotion. This is what broke Napoleon. Not Josephine's betrayal, but his own emotional outsourcing. He handed the keys to his self-worth to someone who didn't even ask for them. And in doing so, he became the very thing he feared: powerless. History is filled with men who built kingdoms, but collapsed in the quiet chambers of love. It's not a coincidence, it's a pattern. Because the same fire that fuels greatness also craves something soft to come home to. And when that softness turns cold, even the strongest men unravel. Take Julius Caesar, a man who ruled Rome, a strategist, a general, a political genius. But Cleopatra? She had him wrapped around her finger. He crossed oceans for her, waged wars, shifted alliances, not for Rome, for her gaze, her approval, her mystery. And when he began losing political ground, it wasn't the Senate that destroyed him. It was the emotional instability she created in his world. History remembers him as a statesman, but underneath the marble busts and golden wreaths was a man torn between power and love. Or Alexander the Great, a man who never lost a battle, but cried endlessly when his closest companion, Hephaestion, died. His army feared no nation, but their leader collapsed into silence and sorrow over a single person. Even King Solomon, the wisest man to ever live according to Scripture, was driven into ruin by his attachments. His heart turned away because of his love for foreign women. He had wisdom, wealth, and worship. But what did him in? Romantic obsession. Let's be clear. It's not love that destroys these men. It's the imbalance of power inside that love. It's when a man gives his soul, but forgets to keep his center. It's when admiration turns to addiction and connection becomes a cage. These weren't weak men. They were unbound men, until someone made them believe that emotional validation was their final prize. And they traded their thrones for affection, their crowns for crumbs. So if you're watching this and thinking, why do I feel so weak when I love? The answer might be, because you're not loving. You're losing yourself. You don't need to stop feeling. You need to stop giving your identity to someone else's attention span. History proves it over and over. The man who builds empires but forgets to guard his soul will fall, not to armies, but to his own hunger to be seen. Women don't always want a powerful man. They want a man who feels powerful, but only to the extent that she can influence him. See, there's a difference between being admired and being manageable. And most people, men and women alike, feel safer around what they can predict. An uncontainable man? He's unpredictable. He moves according to his vision, not her emotions. He leads without asking for approval. He builds without waiting to be praised. And that is terrifying. Many women say, I want a strong man. But what they often mean is, I want a strong man who listens to me, who changes for me, who bends when I need him to. In other words, strength that submits. But real strength doesn't submit. It doesn't shrink. It doesn't explain itself for being itself. And when a woman comes face to face with that kind of presence, the kind that can't be manipulated emotionally, her primal instinct kicks in. If I can't control this, I must retreat from it. This isn't cruelty. It's wiring. Throughout evolution, women depended on safety for survival. Their nervous system is wired for harmony. But true masculine power brings disruption. It questions everything. It destabilizes illusions. And it forces uncomfortable truths to the surface. A man like that is exciting, but only from a distance. Up close, he's a mirror. He reflects back everything she hasn't resolved within herself. And unless she's done deep inner work, she will confuse his independence with emotional detachment. She'll think, he doesn't need me, so how do I feel valuable? That's when the distancing starts. Not because you're lacking, but because you're too complete. Here's the paradox of powerful men. They attract attention, but they also trigger insecurity because their presence says, "I won't change who I am to be loved." And most people aren't ready for that. If you've ever wondered why a woman lost interest when you were finally stepping into your strength, this may be the reason. You didn't do anything wrong. You just stopped being controllable. And for some, that's unforgivable. You've been told to move on, to let go, to forget her. But you don't need to forget her. You need to remember yourself. Because the man you were when you chased her, that wasn't your final form. That was your reflection in her mirror, distorted, diluted, shaped by the need to be wanted. Now it's time to break the mirror. Self-awareness isn't some spiritual slogan. It's war. A war against the version of you that believes love must be earned through performance. A war against the voice that says, you're only valuable if someone chooses you. That voice doesn't belong to you. It was installed by culture, childhood, or conditioning. Real self-awareness begins with brutal honesty. Where did I abandon myself to keep someone else? That's the turning point. Here's the truth. You don't need revenge. You don't need a rebound. You need stillness. Stillness sharpens the mind. Silence amplifies the truth. And in that silence, you remember something primal. You were never meant to be someone's emotional provider. You were meant to be your own source, not a savior, not a servant, not a clown dancing for attention. You are the fire, the foundation, the damn mountain. The greatest comeback isn't loud. It's quiet. It's private. It's the rebuilding of a man no one can shake. A man who doesn't ask, "Why didn't she love me?" but instead asks, "Why did I stop loving myself just to keep her near?" That's the shift. That's the rebirth. Not out of anger, not out of ego, but out of clarity. Because the moment you remember who you were before she left, before you begged, before you bent, is the moment you never need to chase again. You're no longer missing. She may have left, she may have broken you, but she didn't destroy you, because what broke wasn't your soul. It was your illusion, the belief that someone else was supposed to complete you. But wholeness was never in her hands. It was always in yours. Let this truth settle. You were never weak for loving. You were just misguided for making her love the center of your identity. Now, you don't need to hate her. You don't need to erase the memories. You don't need to rewrite history. You just need to remember that wasn't love. That was dependence dressed as devotion. And now it ends. Not with rage, not with revenge, but with return. The return to the man who doesn't shrink, the man who doesn't beg, the man who remembers his worth in silence, not in her eyes. You don't have to prove anything to her or to the world. You only have to prove it to one person, you. And the proof isn't in what you say, it's in what you become. No more chasing, no more justifying, no more bending to be loved. Now, you rise, you rebuild, you return. Let her leave, let her forget, let her find someone she can control. But you find yourself again. And when you do, you'll look back and realize she was never the loss. You were.